The United States has rebuked Israel for its strike against Hamas in Qatar, calling it an unfortunate incident. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he ordered the strike, which took place on Tuesday afternoon in the Qatari capital Doha, where Hamas's exiled leadership is based. The group says its top leaders survived the attack, but that 5 lower-ranking members were killed.
Smoke and dust rises over Doha, the latest stage for Israel's hunt for Hamas. The Qatari capital has hosted several rounds of talks aimed at ending the war in Gaza. But after this Israeli strike, targeting the senior Hamas leadership, Qatar says peace is only further away.
Qatar will not tolerate any violation of its sovereignty. It will respond firmly to any reckless breach or aggression that threatens its security and undermines regional stability. Qatar reserves the right to respond to this blatant attack and will take all necessary measures to address it.
Several Middle Eastern states condemned the attack, and even the White House sent a strongly worded message.
Unilaterally bombing inside Qatar, a sovereign nation and close ally of the United States that is working very hard and bravely taking risks with us to broker peace, does not advance Israel or America's goals. However, eliminating Hamas, who have profited off the misery of those living in Gaza, is a worthy goal.
But in Israel, some relatives of hostages still held in Gaza didn't think so.
To be honest, I'm horrified at the idea that when we finally had an American-led deal that could have led to the release of all hostages, this is the action that took place. And this is why, again, when I have no regrets for these people whatsoever, I have no pity for them, I don't want to see them killed. I want to see everybody signing a deal that brings all hostages back.
I'm shaking with fear. It could be that at this very moment, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu basically assassinated my Matan, sealed his fate. Anyone who decides to deliberately endanger my Matan's life is murdering him. Why does the Prime Minister insist on blowing up every chance for a deal? Why?
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he ordered the strike to make good on his promise to hit
terrorist chiefs who planned, launched, and celebrated the horrific massacres of October 7th.
The ensuing war in Gaza has raged for almost 2 years now. The UN says famine is spreading in the Strip. According to Gaza's health ministry, the war has killed more than 60,000 Palestinians.
Well, Fawaz Gerges is a Middle East analyst and professor of international relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Welcome to DW. Has this attack destroyed the chances of a ceasefire, as the Secretary-General seems to think?
Well, I think if you ask me about the mediation efforts are dead. Qatar was the key mediator between Israel and Hamas in the past 2 years. And what Benjamin Netanyahu has done in one stroke, he destroyed the credibility and the authenticity and the structure of the mediation efforts. He violated the sovereignty of Qatar, he humiliated Qatar, and he basically, not only he did so with the United States prior knowledge of his attacks on Qatar, and this really, it changes the entire strategic landscape in the region.
Because, as you read it, that makes the US complicit with Israel in either allowing this to go ahead or not being able to stop it.
Well, look, everything we know from the Israeli side and the American side, that Benjamin Netanyahu had basically informed Donald Trump of the attack. What we know about Benjamin Netanyahu, he would not have carried out this attack against a major ally of the United States without either a green light or a yellow light from the Trump administration. In fact, the White House made it very clear today in a press conference that the Trump administration, President Trump, knew about the attack in advance. Unfortunately, the White House said, but well, since the attack, the target of the attack were Hamas leaders, it was worth it, the White House said, quote unquote. But here is the background for your own viewers. Qatar is one of the most important US allies outside of NATO. Qatar has the largest American military base in the Middle East and the world. Qatar, when President Trump, the first visit he made outside the United States was to the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar has promised to invest $1 trillion in the US economy.
Right.
So for President Trump to give Netanyahu either a green light or a yellow light to attack Doha, the capital of Qatar, and violate its sovereignty, basically is a nail in the coffin of the credibility of the United States in the eyes not only of the Qataris, but also of the Gulfis as well.
Okay.
The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Oman and Kuwait.
So let's take the next step, which is, well, was this raid effective? Hamas says its top political leaders actually survived. So is this strike likely to force them to agree to Israel's ceasefire demands?
Well, you know, we have to wait and see. We do not know whether Hamas top leaders have been injured, whether they're seriously injured, whether they escaped the attack. The dust has not settled. But regardless, Hamas' statement has been very clear. It made it very clear that this was a great betrayal on the part of the United States, because in fact they were meeting to discuss President Trump's proposal for a ceasefire. How could Hamas now trust the United States? How could Qatar trust the United States? Who could trust President Trump? Can anyone take his word for granted? My reading is that the casualty of what we have seen today basically is the survival of the hostages, the 20 hostages who are alive, and also the prospect for Palestinian suffering and loss in Gaza, further loss and suffering in Gaza.
You think that this strike has endangered those 20 hostages?
I have no doubts in my mind that there will be no ceasefire. I have no doubts in my mind that Benjamin Netanyahu now is moving full cycle to occupy Gaza City and to try to do as much damage as possible in Gaza, and probably try to force the Palestinians, displace the Palestinians to the southern parts of Gaza.
We'll deal with what's happening in Gaza perhaps in another show. I'd like to concentrate on what happened in Doha. What do you think is the Israeli thinking, ordering a strike on Qatar, which, as you say, is so active in these negotiations? Why do that?
Well, it's very simple, because the commonsensical underlying premise of your question, if you're really interested in a ceasefire, if you're really interested in getting your hostages back, if you're really interested in a peaceful solution, would you carry out an attack and kill the top leaders of Hamas? Because the answer to these questions mean the death, sadly and tragically, of the hostages. And the reality is, the bigger point,
Let me just interrupt you there, because as those of us who don't follow this that closely would view this, that those hostages, in bold terms, they are Hamas's best bargaining chip. Why would this endanger their lives? This is the thing that Hamas has most left to bargain with.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. But when you wipe out the entirety leadership of Hamas, that means you're really coming out to destroy Hamas, period. That this is all-out war. And the reality is, regardless of the attack itself on Qatar, all-out war on Gaza City, as Israeli military officials have made it very clear. They have communicated their concerns to the hostages. the families hostages, that the attack on Gaza City could endanger and risk the lives of the survival, the 20 hostages who are still alive in Gaza. This is the story of the Israeli military. The Israeli military is deeply concerned that all-out war in Gaza City could basically risk the lives of the remaining hostages who are still alive.
Is there likely to be a wider regional fallout from this attack, which has been condemned by so many in the region?
Well, my fear now is that Israel is seen throughout the world and the Middle East is out of control. Israel is, I mean, think about it. Israel is launching attacks almost everywhere. Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and now Qatar. Qatar, which has been a key mediator between Israel and Hamas, and regional players in the Gulf. I mean, remember, Qatar is in the heart of the Gulf Cooperation Council, and these states have been basically normalizing relations with Israel. I mean, this is very serious stuff. How could Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar now take Israel seriously? How about Egypt and Jordan? What you're gonna see in the next few days and next few months is a really serious regional effort at developing a kind of deterrence, because no longer President Trump no longer really either does not have the will or does not really have desire to basically restrain Benjamin Netanyahu, and regional state now, in particular Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan, are concerned that Israel now is acting as a hegemon, as a rogue state, really basically destroying regional stability, regional peace and stability in the area.
You've given us much to think about, and we thank you for that. Fawaz Gerges from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
For more on this, let's bring in Hady. He served as the U.S. Deputy Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and was the Special Representative for Palestinian Affairs. Welcome to DW, Hady. Why would Israel decide to conduct this strike now?
Israel has killed numerous Hamas leaders over the months, and it hasn't impacted the war one bit. The war, which has killed 64,000 Palestinians, 3% of the population, it just continues. And meanwhile, you know, the hostages remain. I really, in many ways, empathize with the families of the Israeli hostages that also cannot understand why Prime Minister Netanyahu would literally, you know, not just attack Hamas, but literally blow up the negotiations themselves. It's an attack yes, it's an attack on Hamas, but it's also an attack on the negotiations. It's an attack on a sovereign country, Qatar. And in many ways, it's an attack on every person in Gaza, whether Palestinian or the Israeli hostages, as you saw in those kind of heartbreaking commentary in your reporting.
Let's go through some of that one by one. So the Trump administration has said that they were not involved in the decision-making process. They also tried to warn Qatar, but that it was already too late. Was the U.S. blindsided then?
Clearly, I mean, it's pretty close to blindsided. If that accounting of events is true, if there was such little time between when the Trump administration was informed and the attack took place that they could not even inform the Qatari government, then clearly, you know, those are not the actions of a U.S. partner. And for a country that has continued year after year to receive billions of dollars of U.S. assistance, to treat the United States like that is kind of extraordinary.
So are there any real prospects of future negotiations left between Israel and Hamas? And how do you see the U.S. participating after this attack?
I really think that Prime Minister Netanyahu sought to blow up these negotiations. I don't see any prospect right now for negotiations resuming. Israel has ordered an all-out assault on Gaza City, which may end up displacing 1 million people for the umpteenth time. It's just heartbreaking.
How do you believe Qatar will respond now? They have said that they would, but what form could that take?
You know, Qatar is a tiny country of just a few 100,000 citizens with, of course, although it does have a U.S. military base, it does have a lot of wealth. They are not seeking, I think, to pick a fight with anyone. They're in a really difficult position. I think what it does is it does give the Qataris some leverage with the United States. It does. I wouldn't expect a military response on their part. I think it puts them in a difficult position, but they've said they reserve the right to respond. And I think we'll have to see. It's a very, very interesting question.
You've already touched upon the next point, but the families of Israeli hostages, they say they're concerned that the attack endangers the lives of their loved ones. Are they right to be worried?
They are absolutely right. So if we could have been, and this has happened numerous times over the last year and a half, on the verge of a deal that would have ended the fighting and brought the hostages home, the Israeli hostages home from Gaza to Israel. So that deal is gone. It's literally been blown up. And I think they are, I mean, it's heartbreaking, but I think their assessment is accurate. I think we are very far away from being able to negotiate a deal. I think this, it shows a real lack of will to negotiate on the part of Israel. And again, it's just absolutely heartbreaking for those families. And it's heartbreaking for all the millions of Palestinians in Gaza and their millions of loved ones around the world.
We'll have to leave it
really
there for now.
tragic.
Mr. Hady Amar with the Brookings Institution, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, let's go through this with Middle East analyst Shani Rozanes and correspondent in Washington, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber. Welcome both. Ben, I'd like to start with you because many will question the sincerity of this White House apology, given that the president knew and didn't warn Qatar until Qatar says the attack was already underway.
That's right. It was kind of a stark criticism on Israel following the strikes, and you could hear and also sense this hint of frustration from the podium when Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, that we just saw there, quoted Trump's words saying that this strike does not advance U.S. or Israeli goals, but it's still not clear when exactly the U.S. military informed the U.S. government and when then U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff informed the Qataris, because as you just said, Qatar said that they were informed by U.S. officials during when these explosions were already occurring in the Qatari capital. And it's clear to see here also why the U.S. is so frustrated. I mean, Hamas leaders were said to have been targeted while discussing basically Trump's proposal in a similar way to what happened between Iran and the U.S. in June. But in this case, it's Qatar, a major U.S. ally, hosting a key U.S. airbase that promised billions in investment, even gave Trump this controversial jet there. So that's a country that was mediating this ceasefire, and it puts Washington in a very complicated position as we're still waiting on more information exactly on the timelines and sequence of the events that White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt did not want to get into these details about what happened earlier today in the sequence of when the Qataris were informed of the strike.
So, Shani, how do you assess the damage to the relationship between the US and Qatar, a major ally, as Ben was just saying?
Trump is very clearly distancing himself, and let's see what he did not do. He did not tweet. He did not come out in his, he can be very chatty. He seems to be very quiet after this today. And he also did not stop Israel. We remember after Iran, when he was really losing it at the end of the war, basically calling the Prime Minister and asking him to bring back those airplanes. And he did not do that as well. So it could be that we're seeing some, it seems like there's a lot of trying to keep face and sort of keep Qatar's, I would say, honor and respect it and its role. We saw also in the message from the White House that they're trying to build up their essential role as an ally for the U.S. But at the same time, this dilemma that the Americans are facing, that they're trying to support Israel because they want to see Hamas eliminated. But then at the same time, they're not quite sure about the Israeli actions and where they are leading. I can tell you that the Qataris, this evening, have released a statement that was very combative, very defined, basically saying we reserve the right to retaliate. This was state terrorism by Netanyahu, accusing him for being, very belligerent, being adding more and more instability to the region while claiming to pursue peace. So we'll see. This is definitely for the Qataris. They were calling for all regional countries to join them in thinking about a coordinated retaliation.
So that just happened in the last a few minutes. What is that retaliation likely to look like?
Well,
from
this
Qatar?
is again where we see the Americans, and this is why it's so important to see. It's hard to see the Americans letting, Qatar go actively into fighting with Israel. I don't see the Saudis or anybody else who are also very, very contentious in relations with Qatar. It's not very, its regional stature is somewhat problematic. So it's not going to be so easy to galvanize all this force. But you do see there's a great discontent in the Arab world, in Europe as well, of strong condemnation, wall-to-wall, against Israel's action today.
Ben, it's just days since Donald Trump urged Hamas's leaders to consider his latest ceasefire proposal for Gaza, the leadership that Israel has just now tried to kill. So where do his attempts to mediate a peace via a country who he has just allowed to be bombed, where does all that now go?
So it will be very hard for the White House to promise its allies, to promise Qatar that an attack like this on broad daylight in a residential area of the capital of a U.S. ally won't happen again. It's not clear if he can actually hold that promise. Qataris are furious about these attacks. They invested huge amounts of time and also effort trying to broker an end to the war in Gaza, as well as the release of all the Israeli hostages still held by Hamas. It's hard to see this continuing on at least Qatari soil. And additionally, if Washington had indeed advance warning of this, it could lead to reprisals against U.S. interests in the region. So it will be quite hard for President Trump to, on one side, promise that this will not happen again. And it's also not clear, as we know that Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that Trump spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister after this attack. It's also not clear if behind doors he told him how frustrated it was that this attack occurred. And as Shani also just mentioned there, if the Pentagon, if Washington knew before this attack, there might have been attempts to stop that and said that it's not the place, it's not the time to carry out this attack. But we're still waiting on this information, as this briefing by White House Press Secretary left, I could say, more questions than answers on the exact timing of when this information was available.
Let me try and wrap up two questions in one with you, Shani. Firstly, so nobody wanted this to happen, apparently, besides Netanyahu and others in his cabinet, but not unanimous backing from the cabinet. And also, this presumably leaves the lives of hostages somewhat in the balance.
Correct. There's great concern to the lives of the hostages. It seems like Israel's assumption when going for this attack, Netanyahu's assumption was we have already assassinated several other leaders of Hamas, and still Hamas understands the value of those hostages, cynical as it is for them as a negotiation chip. So he assumes their logic there will prevail. However, it's just an assumption. And even without that, it's clear that this window of opportunity, when it came to the negotiations that we have had now, was something that even in Israel many people thought was serious and had a possibility of a breakthrough. So this is something happening. And also what Netanyahu might be putting here on the line is his relationship with Trump. It could be that his stature now is damaged with this gamble, maybe having taken Israel one step too far. And we might be seeing a pushback of Trump that is frustrated and wants to see a breakthrough, basically forcing Netanyahu to agree for a deal, even if Netanyahu might not be keenly doing that.
Thanks very much for that, Shani Rozanes is DW's Middle East analyst, and Benjamin Alvarez Gruber, Washington correspondent. Thank you both.
For more on this, I'm joined now by Giorgio Cafiero, CEO of the geopolitical risk consultancy Gulf State Analytics in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Giorgio, to DW. Now, Qatar has played a key role in trying to mediate between Israel and Hamas. What does this attack tell us about Netanyahu's strategy?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on as your guest. I think that there's a few points to consider here. First of all, I think it's very clear that when it comes to the situation in Gaza, Israel is moving ahead with a full campaign of annihilation, and the Israeli leadership is not interested in a continuation of these talks with Hamas through Qatar, the U.S., and Egypt. So I think it's very symbolic, bombing the city where, that has been hosting the talks and killing those on the other side of the negotiations. It tells us, again, Israel is focused on achieving a military victory in Gaza, not negotiating with Hamas. At the same time, I think this is a tactic aimed at distracting the world from the genocide in Gaza. And I would also add there's another point, too, that we need to keep in mind. Qatar and Israel have had a rather complicated relationship for decades. There's a lot of nuance that needs to be understood when explaining this bilateral relationship. When it comes to the Mossad and other intelligence agencies in Israel, these figures from those parts of the Israeli state have a longstanding dialogue and relationship with Qatar. After October 7th, they were in touch with Qatari officials on a daily basis. However, when it comes to certain segments of Israel's political arena, really Netanyahu's base, there is a lot of hatred for Qatar, a view that it is a country that is to be put in the same category as Iran, viewed as a so-called state sponsor of terrorism. And of course, Netanyahu has to cater to these figures such as Smotrich. And I think this domestic angle needs to be considered too when we're talking about why Israel waged this unprecedented military attack on Qatar.
Mm-hmm. Now, Hamas also claims its leaders survived the strike. Does that mean Israel might try to attack Qatar again?
That's an excellent question, and you're absolutely right to suggest that the fact that there were important Hamas figures who survived this attack, it does lead one to wonder if Israel is going to take further military action against these figures in Doha. That is going to come down to a decision that the Trump administration makes. It's basically up to the Trump team. If the White House is going to make it clear to Israel that there are consequences for further military action against this very close U.S. ally in the Gulf, then I think the White House would certainly take the steps necessary to rein in Israel. But if the message from the White House to Israel is you can do this again, no consequences, then I would assume that the Israelis would repeat something like this until they, from their perspective, succeed in taking out all of these Hamas figures in Doha. But again, the main variable in the equation here is the White House.
Mm-hmm. And do you think this Israeli attack has effectively ended the prospect of future negotiations with Hamas?
I think so. That's the short answer. I don't see them resuming in Doha in light of what recently happened. And we should also understand that it's a little difficult to imagine these talks moving to some other country in the region. No country would want to experience what Qatar just did. And I think the message from Israel is that they're going to go after Hamas anywhere, regardless of what country they're in. And if Qatar was not a secure place to host talks between Hamas and Israel through American, Egyptian, and Qatari channels, it sort of begs a question, what country would be safe? So I don't really see these negotiations moving to another country. I don't see them resuming in Qatar. I think, at least for the foreseeable future, the process of negotiations is dead.
That brings us to the next point. Now, several Arab states have condemned the attack. How will all of this affect Israel's relations in the Middle East, not just with Qatar, but with the other players?
It will further inform a perspective that Israel is a pariah state, that it is a country driving instability in the region. One of the key questions that has many analysts scratching their head right now is what impact this is going to have on the Abraham Accords. Will the UAE and Bahrain consider abrogating the normalization deals that they signed with Israel 5 years ago as a consequence of this aggression against Doha? I'm not so sure that they would go that far. I think definitely The UAE and Bahrain have their own vested interests in keeping the Abraham Accords alive. But I do think that the Arab states, such as the UAE and Bahrain, which have normalized relations with Israel, I think they will possibly downgrade those relations, make them low profile, and definitely be a lot bolder in their rhetoric condemning Israel. But I think an abrogation of the Abraham Accords, it is possible. I wouldn't bet on it, but
we'll have to leave it there.
Response.
Sorry, Mr. Giorgio Cafiero, thank you so much, CEO of the geopolitical risk consultancy Gulf State Analytics. Thank you.
Thank you.